Oh, hello, everybody, and welcome to Anxiety Hacks. Now, I'm your host, Kate Hudson-Hall, and today we have an expert guest. Now, her name is Brooke Bralove. She has 20 years of experience as a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist, and certified sex therapist. Now, Brooke specializes in helping adults, couples, and groups dealing with depression and anxiety, trauma, and relationship challenges. Her new passion is accelerated resolution therapy, also known as ART. Now, it's a brief treatment modality using eye movements to provide lasting relief to patients with PTSD, trauma, anxiety, phobias, and OCD. So join us today as Brooke shares her expertise and practical insights to conquer anxiety and find healing. So let's dive in and welcome Brooke. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kate.
Yes, and it's amazing. We want to hear all about art. So tell us, tell us what art is all about.
So, art is an evidence-based treatment modality that uses rapid eye movement and voluntary image replacement to change the way the brain stores distressing images and sensations. So, many people have heard of EMDR,
Oh,
eye
yes, I
movement.
practice EMDR.
Okay, well, there you go. And so it's sort of a cousin to EMDR. There are some differences which I can go into a little bit later on, but it's the same idea that we have to attack trauma and anxiety really where it starts, which is in the body and in the brain. And so we find that, talking and talking and talking about anxiety doesn't necessarily make things better. And this provides just incredible hope for people who feel really stuck, whether it's anxiety, OCD, phobias, and many, many other things like trauma. I can actually help with relationship issues, co-parenting, childhood neglect, many, many things. But since we're here to talk about anxiety, I really want to let people know how art can help anxiety.
Yeah.
And so the way that it can really help people with anxiety is that we work to change images that are related. So let's say somebody comes in with a fear of flying, which is several people I've worked with that. So they come in, they can't, they haven't gotten on an airplane in years, or they get on airplanes and have panic attacks the entire flight, or whether there's turbulence, that kind of thing. So what we would do is we would take an experience that's happened to them in the past, maybe the first time that ever happened or the worst time that ever happened, and we would help them re-experience that temporarily, but not by talking about it, by imagining it in their brain and seeing it like a movie while they do these calming rapid eye movements. And this replicates REM sleep. And I know you know all of this, but it replicates REM sleep, which is where memories are consolidated. And so we're basically doing something that happens overnight, and we're just asking people to do it during the day. So clearly, if they're imagining a time that there was terrible turbulence and they had a panic attack, they're going to get upset in the session, right?
Yeah.
They might get, their heart rate might increase. They might get sweaty, lump in their throats, nauseated, who knows? And so the calming eye movements will begin to decrease those physical sensations. And then through voluntary image replacement and memory reconsolidation and something called positivization, we change all of those images into positive images and the way they wish it had happened. So they might imagine themselves, in first class with a glass of champagne and they're so relaxed, and they're having a great conversation with their seatmate, and maybe the flight is taking them to South Africa, or a place they've always wanted to go. And then we just store that in the brain. And so what happens is, in art we say, keep the knowledge, lose the pain. So they'll have knowledge that they have a history of you know a fear of flying. They won't forget the facts, but they will no longer have and be triggered by those memories, those sensations, and those images. They really disappear. And again, what's so exciting is they disappear in 1 to 5 sessions. And actually,
Brilliant,
phobias are
brilliant.
some of the easiest things to um, sort of work on, because they usually have an origin, right? If you're afraid of spiders, there's likely an incident involving a spider that happened to you where it all started. We're not just born with that fear. And so we really just attack that problem by changing those images from the first time it developed. And
So
it's
that's
super
really interesting.
exciting.
So basically what it's doing, so accelerated resolution therapy is breaking that link between that the past patterns and memory that you have with that difficult feeling.
Yes, that's
So it's
exactly right.
breaking that link. So it's very, so other similar types of therapy that I do where the similar patterns happened is, so with neuro-linguistic programming, there's different techniques that you can do it in there. And then, of course, EMDR, the eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy, that's also excellent.
Yes.
So, but it's the same, it's similar to that, isn't it? So it's breaking that chain.
Yeah.
They
And
haven't got that connection anymore.
exactly. And the only thing I would say, there are a couple differences between EMDR and art. One of them is that while EMDR does reprocessing, art doesn't stop at reprocessing. We actually do positization. So we help you feel even more positive than you did at the beginning of the session. Also with EMDR, it can usually occasionally be sort of more it's looser structure. With art, there's a really clear protocol that we use. It follows steps, and so it's quite predictable. So I'll have somebody who comes in for a session, and by the second session their brain already knows where we're headed in the steps, and sometimes they'll say, oh, I just skipped over that part, I was ready to move on.
Yeah.
And I think that's can really decrease anxiety too, because they really get the hang of it. And again, art is usually only 1 to 5 sessions. And what I really love about art is that it is it's called resolution in the title, because we do resolve something at the end of every single session.
Oh,
Which is really great, because of course sometimes in therapy you open up a big can of worms 5 minutes before the end of session, and then you say, ooh, let's try to hold that or put a pin in it. With this, we really have some type of resolution at the end of every session.
okay.
Yeah.
So if somebody came to you that suffered with bad anxiety, or really intense anxiety, or maybe not so intense anxiety, so how would you help them with accelerated resolution therapy?
Yeah, so I've worked with many people who have a variety of issues related to anxiety. So I'll give you some examples of what I've worked with. So I've worked with performance anxiety. I've worked with fear of public speaking. I had a patient who had an experience where a presentation at work went really badly, and she was really paralyzed about her next board meeting. And so again, we just reprocessed that negative experience, and then we had her see it the way she wants it to be, where maybe she gets a raise at the end and people are giving a standing ovation, and actually we want things that are a little bit over the top, because the brain wants something so good to hang on to. I always tell people the brain isn't that interested if you give it a new story that's just a little bit better. So it can't be that, it was an okay presentation. She has to hit it out of the park.
Yeah, yeah,
Imagine
yeah.
that, and then soar that. So that's worked extremely well. So I'm very encouraged about anything related to performance anxiety. OCD, I can work with someone who will just kind of take a typical day living with OCD and all of the, whether it's repetitive, behaviors. I've worked with someone with incredibly intrusive, violent thoughts. And it actually led her to need to go back and process a childhood trauma. And by resolving the childhood trauma, all of the images left immediately, and she never had another image again. So sometimes you don't even know what you actually need to work on. Like, you might come in with, I don't want to think about these terrible, violent images. And art can lead you to where those body sensations began in the first place. And she was utterly shocked that the two things had anything to do with each other. So we
Yeah.
resolved the earlier trauma, the negative images go away, completely gone. One 60-minute session gone.
Yeah,
And I've spoken to
amazing.
her, I've seen her 3 months later, and she hasn't had a return at all.
Amazing. Amazing. So what about if somebody contacted you that had generalized anxiety? How would you take that forward?
Yeah, so again, that's obviously the most common, right? The most
Yeah.
common sort of form of anxiety these days is just this kind of feeling. And there are two ways we can work with it in terms of when was the very first experience of generalized anxiety. And we ask them to go back as far as they can remember. And sometimes it's amazing. They'll say, I first felt that when my parents dropped me off at sleepaway camp, and that anxiety started with that abandonment. And so again, we'll process the abandonment and the scene that created those body sensations, and the generalized anxiety will improve right away because we solved not actually a problem, but we processed where those body sensations began.
Yeah.
And that's really the key. You could have asked them, when did your generalized anxiety start? And they'll say, I don't know, maybe a year or two when I got a new job. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I wonder if it was earlier. And I wonder if I can help figure out when that time was. And all they do is pay attention to, the lump in their throat or the tightness, in their chest. And you say, when was the first time you felt that? Or, what do you know about that? And then often they know exactly when it was. It's so beautiful to watch how you can heal the present in a way by going back to the past and really kind of, again, as you said, like dismantling that, unhooking them from
Because there's
those
part of them
patterns.
that sorry, Brooke, there's part of them that would know that very first time, but it's accessing it there because their unconscious mind knows. Because I do timeline therapy, so that is just such a powerful therapy to take somebody back to that very first time and work with that experience. It's just incredible to be able to work through and let go of those difficult
Absolutely. Yeah.
experiences and feelings.
And OCD, we would work sort of similarly. When was the first time you felt these compulsions? Or again, we would just have somebody kind of go through a day in their life of living with OCD and seeing all of those patterns. Again, I think panic disorder is a little bit different because there's usually a very first panic attack, but again, it may not be, they may think, well, I remember my first one when I was in high school. But if you ask the unconscious mind through the eye movements, was there an earlier time? Sometimes there is.
Yeah, yeah. And absolutely, and consciously that the person may not realize that, but working with the unconscious mind and accessing that, the unconscious mind remembers everything.
Yeah, and right, and you've seen it, that the way that the eye movements allow you to go deeper. I mean, sort of in the way that like ketamine might or something. It really gives you access to a part of the brain that in talk therapy, you are not going to access, no matter how many times you ask the question. And I love talk therapy. I've been a talk therapist for 20 years,
Yeah, yeah.
but there are limitations, right? And
And it comes to
especially
a
with,
point, doesn't it? And particularly with these particular problems and past traumas can be so difficult. Yes, it's so important to talk about the feelings and work through those feelings of what happened. But sometimes it's sort of it's an extra helping hand, isn't it, to be able to kind of detach from that past experience.
yeah, and have the body do it differently, right? Because,
Yeah.
we can understand why something develops, and still, when we're triggered in the moment, there's not much we can do when our heart rate goes up and we get sweaty palms. And so that's what we're really trying to work on is those triggers. And, people will say, well, I had the same triggers happen, but what they describe is just not feeling connected to it. Like they could talk about it, but they can say, yeah, I mean, for someone with PTSD, yeah, I heard those fireworks, which last year on 4th of July would have just sent me, into my bedroom for days under the covers. And this time I heard them, but I didn't feel stirred up or triggered or have any of those, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses. And I mean, it's just the most amazing thing I have ever done. I think I literally feel like I'm watching magic in front of my eyes, and it is such an honor and a pleasure to do this kind of work. I just absolutely love it, and just want to, share more about it because again, people know a lot about EMDR, but they don't know quite as much about art.
Yeah. And what made you decide to train in it?
So I had a traumatic breakup in 2017, and again, just couldn't quite move past it. Just felt very stuck and had tried several different methods of therapy, and nothing was really working. And someone suggested art, which I had never heard of. And I did 2 sessions, and I was really all better, able to move forward. Could talk about the breakup, but did not have any real feelings attached to it at all. And it, got me unstuck. And so I immediately looked into training and got trained the next year. So I've been doing it since 2018. But I would say over the past year, I have really, really dedicated much more of my time to this work.
Oh, amazing. Amazing. So, Brooke, how can people, so you obviously work online. So how can people access you
Yeah,
and
so
find out more?
I work in person and online, and I think it's really helpful to know that art is equally effective virtually and in person. I prefer in person, but that I prefer in person therapy. That's just how I roll. But you can find out more about me and art at my website, brookebralove.com. Um, Instagram and Facebook is Brooke Bralove Psychotherapy. TikTok is B Bralove Psychotherapy. And I also want to encourage therapists to get trained in this. You can go to acceleratedresolutiontherapy.com. It's actually quite a simple and straightforward training process. And people can also go to acceleratedresolutiontherapy.com to look for art practitioners by state. And so if you want to try to see someone in person, you can certainly do a search by state. And I think it's so worth checking out if you are stuck in certain ways, or if you've tried many things and nothing has quite worked. This is a great, I mean, I'm sort of the end of the line for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're almost hopeless sometimes when they get to me. But I've certainly been able to help a lot of people.
Oh, fascinated. I'm going to go and have a look. I'd love to train in
Yeah,
it.
absolutely.
I love this sort of thing because I know that it works. From the other therapies that I practice, I know that these therapies work. and they are so powerful. And they're short therapies. It's not like long-term counseling.
Right.
And so it's definitely worth people to, to hook up with you and get the help that they need to be able to work through those difficult past experiences and traumas.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it, Brooke. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all this valuable information.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Brooke. And thank you to everybody for listening. So that's all for today's episode. And make sure before you go to subscribe to the podcast on Apple iTunes so you never miss an episode. And, when you get a chance, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. That would be fantastic. So thank you so much. And thank you, Brooke. And I look forward to speaking with you all in the next episode.